Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I discovered Reddit posting, so I figured it was time to share this story. This happened back in 2013. At the time, my now husband was just my boyfriend. His aunt, who I'll call Auntie, was blind but had an incredible outlook on life. Despite her disability, she was independent, intelligent, and had accumulated quite a fortune throughout her 76 years of life. She wasn't born into money, she earned every penny through her own hard work. Auntie and I had a special bond. Once or twice a week, my boyfriend and I would take her out to lunch. During these outings, I'd ask her about how she navigated the world without sight. She always answered my questions, teaching me about resilience and perspective. Everything was going great until Auntie's diabetes got worse. Her health deteriorated rapidly, and she needed to enter hospice care. She asked her best friend, a nurse with over 20 years of experience, to move in and care for her during her final months. We thought this arrangement was perfect. Someone Auntie trusted would be there around the clock. But strange things started happening. Auntie's credit cards began overdrafting. She received calls from creditors about unpaid bills, which was bizarre because she'd always been careful with her finances. One day we visited and found her fridge stocked full of Pepsi. Odd, considering Auntie only ever drank water for health reasons. There was barely any food in the house. I felt uneasy but hesitated to say anything. I was just a girlfriend after all, and this nurse had been Auntie's friend for decades. Who was I to question their arrangement? Things came to a head about 2 weeks before Auntie passed away. We brought her favorite lunch, a tuna sandwich with fries from her favorite restaurant. The sandwich was already cut in half for easier handling. I asked Auntie if she wanted me to cut the sandwich into smaller pieces for her. Before she could answer, the nurse interrupted and said she would take care of it in the kitchen. She took the plate away, and when she returned a few minutes later, there was only half of the half sandwich left, with a visible bite taken out of it. The nurse placed it in front of Auntie as if nothing was wrong. I told my boyfriend that someone had taken a bite out of Auntie's sandwich. He couldn't believe it at first, saying that couldn't be right. But when we looked over, Auntie was already eating it, unaware of what had happened. I felt rage building inside me. I stood up, took the plate, and walked into the kitchen. There was the nurse eating the other half of Auntie's sandwich. I asked the nurse what she was doing with Auntie's lunch. The nurse said she thought it was for her. I told her that we had offered to buy her food earlier and she had declined, and that this was Auntie's meal. Her face twisted with anger. She threw what remained of the sandwich onto the floor. She then said she needed to get Auntie more tuna for her lunch tomorrow and stormed out, leaving me stunned in the kitchen. My boyfriend and I told his mother, who worked as a lawyer, about the incident. She grew concerned and offered to review Auntie's financial records. What she found was shocking. This friend had stolen $45,000 from Auntie's accounts. The money had gone toward furnishing a new apartment, buying clothes, and other personal expenses, all while Auntie was dying and unable to monitor her own finances. We called the police. When they arrived, the nurse tried to play innocent, returning Auntie's credit card. The nurse said that Auntie had told her she could use her money and that Auntie wanted her to have nice things. That's when we heard Auntie's cane tapping down the hallway. Despite her weakness, she'd gotten out of bed to confront her friend. Auntie called her a witch and pointed out that while she couldn't see the nurse robbing her because of her blindness, the kids had caught her eating the sandwich. She told the nurse she was removing her from her will and firing her both as her nurse and as her friend. The police arrested the nurse that day. She was convicted of elder abuse and financial fraud. The court ordered her to repay every penny she'd stolen, not to Auntie, who had passed away shortly after, but to the inheritors of her estate, my husband and his brother. The entitled nurse thought she could take advantage of a blind, dying woman. She believed her friendship with Auntie gave her the right to help herself to whatever she wanted. In the end, she lost everything: her freedom, her nursing license, her reputation, and a friendship with an extraordinary woman. And all because she couldn't resist stealing from someone who couldn't see her do it and eating a sandwich in front of people who could. My baby face caused a commotion at the hospital. At 20 years old, I'm a nursing student doing clinical placements at a public hospital in South Africa. Despite being an adult, I look younger than my age. Usually just annoying when buying age-restricted products, but it turned into a scene during one shift. In South Africa, nursing students wear distinctive uniforms with epaulets, nursing watches, and badges that mark us as hospital staff. There's no mistaking us for random people, which makes what happened ridiculous. It was during my internal medicine rotation, and I was having a routine day. My job included changing drips, giving medications, and doing patient assessments. I felt confident about my skills after weeks on the ward when I got a new patient, an elderly lady in her late 70s. She seemed clear-minded and well-spoken as I walked to her bed with a smile. I greeted her, told her I was a nursing student on the ward, and welcomed her to Ward 6. Instead of answering, she gave me a stink eye and ignored me. I tried not to take it personally. Hospital stays can be stressful for anyone, especially older people. I got the paperwork and equipment for her admission and went back to her bed, determined to give good care despite her first reaction. I told her I needed to do her admission assessment, explaining I would take her blood pressure, test her blood glucose and hemoglobin, measure her weight, and collect urine for testing. I tried to keep my voice steady while preparing the blood pressure cuff. She looked at me before asking about my age. I told her I was 20 years old. That's when things went bad. Her face changed as she started shouting. She said I was an imposter and just a child who couldn't be working there. I stepped back, surprised by her outburst, but tried to stay professional. I tried telling her I was a nursing student on placement and allowed to care for her, but she wouldn't listen. She screamed for security, her voice going through the ward. She kept saying I was a child pretending to be a nurse, saying I would go to prison, and that I couldn't fool her. Before I could think, she jumped forward and grabbed my collar, trying to take my badge. I backed away, but she had strong fingers for her age and kept hold of my uniform. I started asking her to let go, but heard rushing footsteps as my supervisor and head nurse ran into the room. My supervisor asked what was happening. The elderly patient kept accusing me, saying I was a child pretending to be a nurse. She pointed out how young I looked and wanted them to call the police. I stood there embarrassed as she held my uniform, my face hot, while other patients looked from their beds. My supervisor told the woman to let me go, saying I was allowed to be there and give her care. The elderly patient didn't believe this, pointing at my young face as proof I must be lying. The head nurse then told the woman I was 20 years old and a nursing student doing required training. She said I was qualified to do the admission steps I had described. The elderly woman finally let go of my uniform but kept looking suspicious. My supervisor asked if she wanted someone else to do her admission. The woman looked at me, then at my supervisor, thinking about the situation. She said if my supervisor backed me up, maybe she was wrong. She admitted she might have overreacted because I looked young. I accepted her half apology as nicely as I could and asked if she wanted me to continue or prefer someone else. She said I could go on but warned me to be gentle with the blood pressure cuff because her skin bruised easily. With that awkward moment over, I did her admission assessment. My hands still shook from the confrontation, but I focused on being professional and thorough. The strange part came about an hour later. After I finished her admission tasks and made her comfortable, she called me to her bed. She asked me to come closer. The elderly woman then gave a better apology for her earlier behavior. She explained her bad eyesight and fears about scammers targeting old people had made her scared and suspicious. I told her I understood and it was okay. She said I was very skilled for someone young and my parents must be proud. From then on, she became maybe the sweetest patient I'd ever cared for during my training. She told everyone about her exceptional young nurse and how gentle I was when changing dressings or giving medications. Later that week, when I checked her vitals, she had saved me chocolate that her daughter brought. She gave it to me for putting up with a cranky old woman who jumped to conclusions. By the time she left, she had become one of my favorite patients. despite our rough start. She asked for me to explain her discharge instructions and medications. As she left in a wheelchair pushed by her daughter, she took my hand and squeezed it. She told me to keep my young face, saying it might cause misunderstandings but would keep me looking good when I became old and cranky like her. I drive an old police interceptor, one of those retired police vehicles. It's black and white with a push bar and spotlight, but I've removed all the emblems. The paint job is pretty scratched up all over, making it look even more rough around the edges. I'm saving money to get it properly repainted, but it's taking time. I don't want people thinking I'm pretending to be law enforcement. It's just an affordable car that happens to be reliable. So last Tuesday, I was parked in the back of a shopping center lot, out of everybody's way. I had just picked up a Subway sandwich and was sitting there enjoying my lunch break. I was lost in my food. One of those moments where nothing else matters except the sandwich in your hands. I was mid-bite when there was a sharp, aggressive knocking on my window. Looking up with my cheeks stuffed with sandwich, I saw an older woman standing there. She had that classic haircut you see in all those internet memes about entitled customers. You know the type. I rolled down my window, trying to quickly swallow my food, and asked if I could help her. The woman started complaining that I had finally decided to make my presence known. She went on about how she'd been complaining to the police for weeks about homeless people hanging around the businesses in the area. Then she pointed across the parking lot at a man who was just sitting quietly by himself, not bothering anyone, saying that there was one right there. I told her that there was a mistake. I wasn't a police officer, just someone driving a retired police cruiser. I offered to move somewhere else if that would make her feel better. Her face twisted into a scowl. She demanded that I stop lying to her, get out of my car, and go tell the homeless man to leave the area. I felt my patience wearing thin but tried to stay calm. I told her not to speak to me that way, explaining that I'd been courteous and honest with her. I told her again that I wasn't a police officer and suggested she call the non-emergency line for the local police department if she had concerns. She yelled that she paid my salary, called me a jerk, and said I had no right to talk to her that way. She accused me of being unprofessional. I realized this conversation wasn't going anywhere. I rolled up my tinted window, turned up my radio, and went back to enjoying my sandwich. I figured she'd get bored and leave. About 5 minutes later, I jumped when several police cars pulled up with lights flashing and sirens blaring. They surrounded my vehicle and told me to exit the car. I complied, raising my hands and following their instructions. They searched me, then started asking questions. Someone had called in reporting that I was impersonating a police officer. I've been doing monthly ride-alongs with this police department for a few years. I'm familiar with many of the officers, and they know I respect what they do. One of the backup officers recognized me right away. He knew me, knew my car, and knew I would never pretend to be law enforcement. After searching my car and finding nothing suspicious, they started piecing together what happened. The officers walked over to talk to the man the lady had pointed out. He told them I had done nothing except sit in my car and eat my lunch. Then they turned their attention to the woman who had called them. They began lecturing her about filing false reports, explaining how she had wasted emergency resources and created a dangerous situation for me. She didn't take this well. She started yelling about how she paid their salaries and demanded to speak to a supervisor. One of the officers radioed for a supervisor. A few minutes later, a sergeant arrived, someone I knew quite well. He's been encouraging me to apply to the police department for months now. He's great at calming tense situations. The woman started shouting at him. As he tried to explain the situation, she poked him in the chest with her finger. The sergeant warned her not to touch him again, saying she was lucky she wasn't already under arrest. She told him to get lost and then shoved him. Within seconds, she was handcuffed and being read her rights. She was charged with multiple offenses, including filing a false report and assaulting an officer. She went from angry to sobbing in the back of a police car quickly. The sergeant walked over to me after she was secured and told me that the situation had escalated quickly. He said sorry for the trouble and mentioned that the department would be pressing charges against the woman. We all laughed about the situation before they took her away. Before I left, I approached the man who had been sitting quietly through this whole ordeal and had told the officers the truth about what happened. I asked if he was hungry, and when he said yes, I went to the subway nearby and bought him a sandwich. He thanked me. I thanked him for being honest with the police, and then we went our separate ways. This incident convinced me that repainting my car needed to move up on my priority list. I've already started looking into affordable options to get rid of the black and white color scheme. Until then, I guess I'll be eating my sandwiches at home. This happened during my teenage years, when I was living in a small town with my parents. I'd moved around a lot as a kid, sometimes only staying in one place for a couple of months before packing up again. Being the new kid constantly meant I was an easy target for bullies, until I finally learned I didn't have to take that nonsense anymore. By the time this story takes place, we'd been in one house for a few years, a personal record for my family. I'd made some friends, gotten to know the neighbors, and we all got along pretty well. Our house sat on a hill that sloped down into our neighbor's property, which made it perfect for sledding in the winter. The arrangement with our old neighbors was simple. Their kids could come onto our property to go down the hill, and I could sled all the way down into theirs. Everyone was happy. Then our neighbors moved away, and that's when the trouble started. The new neighbor, I'll just call him Mr. Jerk, was awful from day one. He littered everywhere, kicked other neighbors' pets, and I once saw him scream at a sweet old lady across the street, just for looking at him funny. I tried not to think much about it until winter came around. When the first snow fell, my friends and I grabbed our sleds like we always did. We went down a few times, enjoying the rush and the cold air on our faces. Then Mr. Jerk came storming out of his house. He yelled at us about trespassing on his property. When I tried to explain about our arrangement with the previous owners, he cut me off and threatened to call the police if we didn't get off his land right away. I've always been reasonable. Even though this guy was clearly a jerk, it was his property and he had the right to tell us to leave. So we adjusted our sledding, going slower and stopping before crossing onto his land. A few days later, I noticed Mr. Jerk's kids trudging up our part of the hill to go sledding. When I talked to them, they told me their dad had given them permission to use our hill whenever they wanted. I told them they couldn't just come onto our property without permission, and if we weren't allowed on their property, they weren't allowed on ours. I walked over to Mr. Jerk's house to sort this out. I knocked on the door, and when he answered, I tried to be polite. I suggested a deal where if he would let us sled down the full hill into his property like before, we would let his kids use our part of the hill too. His response wasn't reasonable. He started yelling, calling me stupid, and saying that while his kids could go wherever they wanted, we had to stay off his land. He kept screaming bad words at me for 30 minutes, before my uncle, who was visiting, and I walked away, with Mr. Jerk still yelling behind us. That's when I decided on psychological warfare. Having spent time with the previous neighbors, I knew the layout of Mr. Jerk's house pretty well. I also knew that the gravel path in his backyard connected to our gravel path through the woods behind our houses. And most importantly, I'd learned that Mr. Jerk had a newborn baby girl. Through talking with Mrs. Jerk, who was actually quite nice, I discovered two key pieces of information. One, their baby was an extremely light sleeper and very difficult to get back to sleep once awakened. Two, Mrs. Jerk took care of the baby during the day, which meant Mr. Jerk was responsible for nighttime duties. When I was clearing our driveway after a fresh snowfall, I offered to clear Mrs. Jerk's driveway and their gravel path too. What I really wanted was to make sure that path was clear so I could use it without leaving footprints. My plan was ready. During winter break, I started sleeping during the day so I could stay up all night. When it was pitch dark, I snuck out and followed the gravel path to their house. The path circled around to where the baby's room was located. I picked up a handful of small gravel pieces and began tossing them one by one at the window, just enough to wake the baby. Soon I heard wailing that could have woken the dead. Through the window, I could see Mr. Jerk stumbling into the room, looking tired as he picked up the screaming baby. He spent about 30 minutes rocking and soothing her back to sleep. I waited reading my book with a small flashlight. Once he went back to bed, I waited another 20 minutes, then started the process all over again. Whenever I thought he might be getting suspicious, I'd duck into the woods and hide until it seemed safe to return. I kept this up until about 4 a.m., then sneaked back home. The next day, I could see Mr. Jerk looking tired as he left for work. I repeated this routine every single night for an entire week. By day 5, Mr. Jerk looked like a walking zombie. Dark circles under his eyes, stumbling as he walked, forgetting to close doors. But on day 7, I made a mistake. He caught a glimpse of me as I was running back into the woods. The next day, in his sleep-deprived state, Mr. Jerk didn't come after me. Instead, he attacked my uncle who happened to be walking by his house. Big mistake. The police were called, and Mr. Jerk was arrested for assault. He didn't go to jail, but he got slapped with hefty fines and ended up losing his job over the incident. After that, the sledding issue disappeared. When the next snowfall came, my friends and I sledded all the way down the hill into what used to be the forbidden zone. Mr. Jerk saw us from his window, but didn't say a word. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.